Before I start explaining what functional programming really is, I want you to understand that various programming paradigms exist because the inventors of these programming languages thought that this particular way may be easier for writing large computer programs. Remember, programs should be written in such a way so that they not only work correctly and are fast enough, but also they are easy to maintain and easy to think and talk about. The point being, can somebody visualize the whole system in their heads without worrying about the details? And if requirements change, and they always do, is it easy to make changes in your code without fearing that you may have broken something in the process? So, some computer scientists thought that object-oriented programming is the way because it is easier to think and reason about a program in terms of objects and what behavior they exhibit. Similarly, others think that functional programming paradigm is the way to go because you can be more certain about functions, like we are certain about input and output values of functions in mathematics. And then there are other types of languages, but the general purpose programming languages may be mainly categorized into procedural, object-oriented, and functional languages. We also have hybrid languages that contain a mix of these paradigms. Alright, so now let's first understand the difference between an object-oriented language and a functional language. In case of an object-oriented language, the way to think about program design is to think in terms of objects and their interactions. For example, if we were writing a little program which calculates areas and perimeters and such for geometrical shapes, we will have various types of these shapes which contain the area and perimeter methods, and then to calculate area of a circle of certain radius, we would create an object and then find its area. But in case of functional programming languages, functions are of importance. So we are likely to have a function which calculates the area of a circle given its radius. Well, the code shown here is of course simplistic, but the purpose is more to explain the difference between these paradigms. So the way to think about programs in such languages is to think in terms of data transformation. I mean, that would be the starting step. You have some initial data and you pass it through a function, and you have another data which is probably what you need, okay? And it may be a little hard to really get a feel of it, but by end of this course, you would have seen enough examples to be able to get the difference. A more difficult thing would be to understand the difference between functional paradigm and procedural programming paradigm. And I get this question many times during the classroom training sessions. After all, don't we write the same kind of code in a language like C? So how does one distinguish between the two? Here is a little C program which calculates the area of a circle, but C is a procedural language. So how is this C procedure for calculating the area of a circle different from a JavaScript function? Well, let's compare a few things. Let's look at these two statements to declare a variable. C is a statically typed language, so it must declare the type of the variable, whereas JavaScript is dynamically typed. Now, you have already seen how to write functions in JavaScript, and you may be surprised by this. We can actually hold a JavaScript function itself in a variable like this. And that is because in a functional language, there is no difference between function and data. Alright? Functions are just like objects. Whereas in a C program, we cannot hold a function in a variable. Firstly, because there is no function type for such a variable, and even if it was dynamically typed, C just doesn't treat its functions as objects. So they are more of procedures. Let's get back to our JavaScript console to understand this. Let's declare a function ABC like shown here. Now let's see what this ABC is. So let's type ABC in the console and hit enter. As you can see, JavaScript just treats it as a function object, which is the same as saying that a variable ABC holds some function. That is, we could have written the same thing as this. And here we did not give this function a name. We just wrote it as an anonymous function and stored that function in a variable. Both forms are exactly the same, and we can still invoke the ABC function like so. Another way to see that JavaScript treats function as an object is that let's add 6 to this function. And the result shows what JavaScript does with an object. That is, it takes the string representation of an object and appends it with the string representation of another object, right? You must notice that we have not called the function as yet. If we run this statement, then we are making a function call, and whatever is returned by the function is being appended with the number 6. Alright, so functions as such can also be passed around as arguments to other functions, which is what we will see next. The basic thing to remember is that data and functions are treated pretty much the same, and in fact in a pure functional programming language like Haskell, data is said to be a zero order function. This is a little heavy, so it may take some time to settle down, which is perfectly alright. There are more details like pure functions which involve side effect free programming and stuff, but I'll not get into more detail right now. The purpose of this course is for you to have a decent background in JavaScript to be able to write good quality JavaScript code and be able to understand what would be going on behind the scenes when you use frameworks like jQuery or AngularJS. As explained earlier, data and functions are pretty much treated the same way if a language supports functional style of programming. So that means functions can also be passed as arguments to other functions. Let's take an example. Let's say we want to print numbers from 1 to some max integer. So we write a function, call it numprinter, and pass that integer as argument named up to. And we just iterate over the numbers from 1 to whatever up to is, and then print it out on the console. Now, what if we want to print only the odd numbers? Many programmers may copy the already written function, give it a new name, say odd number printer or something, and inside it, one may check if I is odd, then print it out on the console. But what if another requirement comes along similar lines, where it is said that not only can I choose to print odd numbers, but also even numbers or prime numbers, okay? So shall we keep copy pasting the code? Whenever you find yourself copy pasting the code, making a few changes to it, you should think about how can you abstract out what changes from what remains the same. And if you can pass what changes as an argument. So in our example, what remains the same is iterating over a range of integers and printing it out on the console. And what changes is if the number should be filtered for printing, right? So we can pass a filter function to the numprinter function like this. And inside the for loop, before printing it out, we can check if the number should be filtered for printing. So this function that we pass should take a number as a parameter and must return a Boolean value. So let's write another function isOdd, which takes a parameter n, and here we can return whether the number is divisible by 2 or not, okay? And now we can pass this function itself to the numprinter like this. So this prints all odd numbers from 1 to 10. Of course, we can also pass some argument, say some function xyz if it was written, which doesn't take any argument and returns some number, or instead of a function, we can even pass a number for the filter parameter. And JavaScript doesn't complain. Of course, it will complain at runtime when the program executes. And I want you to try and run the numprinter with some invalid argument, but it should be syntactically valid. And that is because of dynamic typing. And that's the reason why many people prefer to use statically typed languages, so that it's easier to catch many such errors at compile time itself. Anyways, dynamically typed languages are usually fun to work with, so don't get scared with it. You just need to be a little more careful. So a function which either takes a function or functions as arguments or returns another function is called a higher order function. Just like in maths, we can define a higher order function h of x as f of g of x. Alright? In this lecture, we saw how to pass functions as arguments and use those arguments inside a function body. Another type of a higher order function is when we return a function from inside a function. But that we will see in. Functions in JavaScript may also be written without names. Such functions are called anonymous functions. Let's look at the numprinter example from the previous lecture. We had written another function called isOdd and passed that function itself as an argument to numprinter. Now, JavaScript allows a function to be written without giving it a name, like this. So this function basically takes an argument, which should be a number, and returns whether the number is odd. So this is exactly the same as isOdd function that we wrote earlier, but without any name. A function without a name is called anonymous function. The only problem is that if we don't give it a name or don't hold it in a variable, then we cannot call it later. So it becomes pretty useless and JavaScript doesn't allow us to create it. But if you look at the numprinter function, the parameter name is like a variable. So instead of writing a named function like the isOdd function, we can pass an anonymous function as the filter argument like this. And this can be handy if our function is not really reusable and we just want to use it this once, or we are returning a function from another function as a closure, which we will learn about pretty soon. Let's take another example. Arrays provide a for each function, and this function takes another function as an argument, such that the passed function works on each of the element of the array. So the for each function takes another function as an argument, and this function should take an element of the array and do something with it. If you want to print all the elements of an array, one way to do is to use a for loop, alright? A more functional style to do the same thing would be to use the for each function of the array. So we can write a function, let's call it print element, which takes an element of an array as an argument and prints it out on the console. Now let's create an array of numbers, then call the for each function on this array and pass the print element function as an argument to for each. And as you can see, the for each function goes over each element of the array and passes that element to this argument function, which in turn has logged the element on the console in our example. We could have done something else with the element if we wanted. Now instead of passing this named function, we can also pass an anonymous function like so. Which does exactly the same thing, it just doesn't have a. This is a very simple idea. In JavaScript, we can write a function inside another function. Consider this example. We want to write a function that, given the length of two sides of a right angle triangle, we want to find its hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is the root of the sum of the squares of two sides. Of course, a square is supposed to be a more generic function, but let's say that we don't want the square function to be accessible to anyone else. We want this function to be called from within the hypotenuse function only. So we can write the square function inside the hypotenuse function itself. One function inside another, and these are called nested functions. So square function is nested inside the hypotenuse function. Let's just write this function in our JavaScript console, and let's find the hypotenuse of sides 3 and 4, which of course is 5. But if we try to call the square function directly, we cannot do that. Alright. So nested functions can be called from the function inside which they are declared and not from outside. Alright. Another thing to notice in case of nested functions is that any variable declared inside the outer function is also available within the inner function. For example, let me just declare a variable named y and assign some number, say 46 to it. Now this variable is accessible even within the nested square function. Let me just print the value of y from inside this function. Now if you call the hypotenuse function, it also prints 46 a couple of times because the square function has been called twice. So that brings us to another thing, closures, which we will look in the next. A closure is a very interesting functional programming tool. Let's see what it is. As you have already seen in the previous lecture, local variables in the outer function are visible to the inner function also. Let's take another example, a slightly different one to highlight what closures are. Let me first declare a variable in the global scope. Let's call this variable scope and initialize it to the string global scope. Alright. Now let's write a function check scope which doesn't take any parameters, and inside this we declare a variable with the same name scope and assign the string local scope. Then we write a nested function. Let's just call it f. And this function returns the scope variable that it sees. And finally, the outer function returns a call to the function f. Alright? Just go through it a little slowly to understand. We have declared a function f, and just like the hypotenuse example, which made a call to the nested square function in the return statement, here we are returning the value returned by invoking the function f. Alright? Cool. So now let's see what is the value of the scope variable. And of course, it is global scope. If we call this function check scope, it returns the string local scope because the function f sees the local variable, right? And what if we had not defined this local variable? Then of course the function f would have seen the global variable, but that part is not interesting. Variables in local scope are interesting in context of nested functions. By the way, what we saw till now was straightforward. The twist comes if instead of calling the nested function f, we return that function itself from the outer function like this. If we call the check scope function now, what do you think should get printed? It will print the function definition of f, right? Note that we have not yet called the function. And if we make a call to the returned function, what do you think should it return? Global scope or local scope? Observe that after the outer function check scope has returned, this variable which is in the local scope of the check scope function should go out of scope now, isn't it? So what do you think gets printed? Let's print it and see. So function f still returns local scope, and that may come as a surprise. Now this happens because JavaScript functions are executed using the scope chain that was in effect when they were defined. Alright. So if you look here, this nested function was defined under a scope chain in which this variable scope was bound to the value local scope. And this bonding will remain effective whenever or wherever this inner function is called, even though it seems like that this scope variable goes out of scope when the check scope function returns. So you can imagine that if the outer function returns the inner function takes all the local context within the outer function along with it, which is always available to the inner function even when the outer function goes out of scope. And here even the parameters passed to the outer function will be available to the inner function, because after all parameters to a function are local variables, alright. So one may imagine or say that the inner function closes on the local context available in the outer function, and that is why the name closure. By the way, closures are not just available in JavaScript, rather any programming language that claims to support functional programming. By the way, if a function returns a closure, do you think that function should be a higher order function? Of course, right? Because higher order functions are ones which either take other functions as parameters or they return a function. So this may have been a little heavy, but once you understand it, you will start appreciating the beauty of functional programming and how some of the things can be done better. In the next lecture, let's take an example of how to use closure. Let's use this idea of closure to write an iterator function, and what we would like to do is that it should give us a new number starting from a particular number, increasing by some fixed step size every time we call that function. And we don't want any upper cap. That is, as long as we call the function, we keep getting numbers in a step. For example, we may say that we would like to start from the number 0 and keep getting numbers in steps of 2, which will be all the even numbers. Okay. Now I want you to pause the video here and try it yourself before moving on. It is okay to struggle a little because that's how you really learn. So let me write this function and call it a step iterator, which takes two arguments from the user, the starting number and the step size. Inside this, we write another function, and we can just write an anonymous function because we can return right from here. Okay. Make sure that you understand this. All we are doing is returning this function from the step iterator function. Now let's write the body of the nested function. So first we hold the value of start in another variable. Let's call it res for result. Now we change the value of start by adding step to it, alright? And then we just return the old value of start held in res. Let's call this function step iterator, but because it returns a function, we will need to invoke it later. So let's hold it in a variable. Let's call the variable numbers with 2 steps. And this should be equal to step iterator with the start value of 0 and step size of 2. Okay. So now this variable holds a function. And now we can use this variable to call the function. And we keep getting new numbers as many times as we call this function. Alright. Now this is happening because the start and step variables had a local context and were used inside the inner function, which keeps updating the value of the start variable. So every time we call this function, we keep getting the new values of the start variable, which also gets updated in each call. Also note that if we call the step iterator again, even with the same arguments 0 and 2, and held it in another variable, let's call it another, calls using another will start the iteration from 0 again, and it will not conflict with the previously created iterator. So both of them can happily go their ways. In many programming languages, a collection or set of data is represented as a list, without getting into the nitty-gritties of sets versus list. JavaScript provides arrays as the only data type for collections. Also, languages that support functional style of programming usually provide a construct for creating a list from another list of data in a very natural, crisp, and mathematical way. This construct is called list comprehension. The whole idea being to come up with some output given an initial set of input as an array. We will be talking about three important functions which JavaScript supports: filter, map, and reduce. By the way, the map and reduce functions are not exactly the same as the map reduce algorithm that you may have heard about. So let's start with the filter function. The filter function works on an array, and basically it takes another function as an argument that provides the filtering criteria. So for example, if we have this initial set of numbers in an array and we want to get only the even numbers, we can make use of the filter function. So the filter function creates a new array with only those elements that pass the filtering criteria implemented by the provided function. Let's get back to our JavaScript console and type in our array, and then invoke the filter function. Now this function itself takes another function. So we can either pass an anonymous function, or let's write another function named isEven, which takes an element or item and tells whether this element is even or not. And now we can pass this isEven function to the filter function like this. And when we hit enter, we get the new list or a new array containing only those elements that met the filter criteria. Alright, that's easy. Of course, we can pass an anonymous function if that makes it easy. In case we want to filter prime numbers, we will write another criteria function, call it isPrime, and do a primality test. And then we can pass that isPrime function as an argument to the filter function. This function that we pass to the filter function is known as the callback function. So let's look at the general structure of the callback function. In general, this is how the callback function looks like. It takes three arguments: the current element, the current index, and the array on which the filter function is invoked. This function must return a Boolean value because we need to use it for filtering the elements. So this function should tell whether this element is fit for filtering or not. The index and the array arguments are provided just in case you want to do something with those in the callback function, although in most cases the current element itself suffice. You must notice that if a JavaScript function takes, say, 3 arguments and we pass only one, the other 2 are passed as undefined. So in the examples that we did, we just used the current element and didn't bother about the remaining 2 arguments. JavaScript starts picking arguments from the first argument, and when all the arguments passed are exhausted, and if there are still more parameters remaining, they are passed as undefined values. To show the complete structure of the callback function, let's pass the index and array as arguments to the isEven function. And we will just log these 3 values on the console. You can see the values of the current element, the current index, and the array itself for each iteration. If you recall what a function is, as defined in mathematics, it is a relation between a set of inputs and a set of permissible outputs such that for each input there is a unique output. The input set is called a domain and the output set is the codomain or range. And the function itself can be said to map the input to the output. Similar to this idea, arrays have a map function which take another function which transforms each element or maps each element to a new element as an output value. And the map function returns a list of such output values. For example, if given an array, we want a new array which is the squares of each of the input elements. So we can use the map function and pass it an anonymous callback function which returns the square of the element. Let's execute this, and as you can see, we get a new list of the squares of the input elements. So in functional programming, you have to think in terms of data transformation as much as possible. The structure of the callback function passed to the map function is very similar to the callback function that was passed to the filter function, which you saw in the last lecture. The only difference is that the callback function passed to the filter function must return a Boolean value, while in case of the map function, the callback function must return the transformed value of the current input element. Alright? Another very useful function that works on arrays is the reduce function. And the purpose of this function is to work on each element of the array, but finally returning a single value of computation. So we say we have reduced an array to some single value of computation. But in what sense? Let's understand with the help of an example. Now, this is slightly difficult to get initially, so be patient and listen carefully. Let's say that given a list, we want to find the sum of all the elements of that list. So just like the filter and map functions, the reduce function also takes a callback function as an argument, but its structure is a little different than what it was in the previous cases. In case of reduce, the callback function is like this. It takes 4 parameters: the previous value of computation, the current element of the array, the current index of the array, and the array on which the reduce function is working. So the additional parameter compared to the earlier callback functions is the previous computation. So let's understand each of those. This first parameter holds the value that was returned in the last invocation of the callback function, or the initial value if supplied. Just bear with me a little. It will be clear when we take an example. The second parameter takes the current element being processed in the array. The index is the index of the current element being processed, and array is the array on which the reduce function was called. Alright? Let me first use the reduce function to compute the sum of the numbers in an array and then explain what is going on. So let me write this array of numbers, then call reduce on it, and then pass a callback function to it. And here we will just pass an anonymous function. And we can optionally pass an initial value to the reduce function as the other argument. Let's pass 0 for that. Now inside the body of this function, we will return previous plus current, alright? And I'll explain why in a second. If we execute this code, we get the sum of the numbers in the array, alright? Let's understand now what's going on. When the execution starts for the given array, the current value that is passed to the callback function is the first element of the array, which is 3. Also, the index value is 0 because the current element is the first element and the index is the index value of the current element. The array is of course the same array on which the reduce function is called. What about the initial value? Well, we pass the initial value as 0, right? And what about previous? Well, the first time the callback function is called, previous is initialized to the initial value, so its value is also 0. Now the callback function returns some value, which is previous plus current, so the first time it returns a value of 3. The next time when the reduce function is called, previous has a value which was returned by the callback function in the last call, which was 3. So previous has a value of 3. Current is the next element in the array, which is 4. Current index is 1, which is the index of the current element, and array is again the same array. Again, the function returns previous plus current, which is 7. So the previous value passed to the callback function this time is 7, which is what was returned from the last call. The current element now is 6, and so on. And this time the callback function returns 13, right? Which will be passed as previous in the next call to the callback function. And this continues until the reduce function reaches the last element, such that now the previous value is 20, the current element is 9, and so on. And the reduce function returns the value that is returned by the callback function, which is 29, and there are no more elements in the array to go to. For the callback function, if we don't make use of the index and array elements, we need not take those as parameters, in which case they will be treated as undefined. So we could have written the callback function like this, just taking the previous and current values. The reduce function also takes initial value as other parameter apart from the callback function, and this parameter is optional. If we don't pass any argument for initial value, it will be undefined. But there will be a little change in the previous and current values the first time the reduce function is called. Let's see that graphically. The first time reduce function is called without the initial value, the previous parameter is assigned the value of the first element. The current parameter is assigned a value of the second element of the array. Alright. The subsequent calls to the callback function remain the same as we saw earlier. Let's use the reduce function to find the sum of n natural numbers. We can directly use the formula, which is of course better, but let's not do that. Rather, let's find it by using the reduce function. If we have to use the reduce function to find the sum of n natural numbers, then we should somehow have an array of numbers from 1 to n, right? Because then we can apply the reduce function on that array. So let's start with writing this function, sum underscore natural underscore numbers, and pass n as argument. And inside this, we need to somehow get an array of numbers from 1 to n. But before that, let's return 0 and hit enter, so that we will change the function definition later. Now we write another function. Let's call it range, which takes 3 arguments, start, end, and step. So this function will generate an array of numbers starting from start, going all the way up to end, using the step to increment the numbers. And the implementation is quite easy. We create an empty array first and then push the numbers into the array beginning from start and then increasing by the step size until we cross end. Okay? And then we return this array. Now let's turn our attention to the sum natural numbers function. This takes an argument n. So here we first create an array of numbers from 1 to n and then use reduce, just like we did earlier, to find the sum of numbers from this array. So when you use functional style of programming, you should design your program in terms of data transformations. You typically start with some initial set of data, then keep generating new sets by applying functions until you reach your desired set of data. Alright? And this may take a little getting used to, so don't worry if you struggle with it initially. Sometimes in a function, a fixed number of arguments do not work, and a function should ideally take a variable number of arguments. For example, let's see the console.log. We can pass a single argument to it, or we can pass multiple arguments to it. That is, this function logs whatever arguments are passed to it. Similarly, imagine if we had a sum function, which of course does not exist right now, but we would like the function to add all the numbers that are passed to it as an argument. That is, whether we pass 3 numbers or 4 numbers, it should just add those numbers. JavaScript provides a keyword called arguments, which is an object accessible to all functions. This object has all the arguments that are passed to the function, and they are accessible in an array-like fashion. By the way, be careful about this arguments object. It is array-like, but not really an array. It doesn't have any other array property except length. Alright? So we can check how many arguments are passed with the length property, but apart from that, we cannot use this argument object as an array. Alright? Let's start implementing the sum function. It doesn't take any arguments because we will be passing a variable number of arguments to it. Now let's first just log each argument that is passed. So we can use a for loop to go over each element of the arguments object. And this works because the indices are actually properties of the object, as you have seen earlier. So if we call the sum function with a few arguments, you can see them printed on the console. Let's make changes to calculate the sum of the numbers passed as arguments. So shall we try to call the reduce function on arguments? Let's try and see what happens. So we return arguments.reduce and pass a callback function to it, just like we did earlier. Alright? Let's call the sum function now. And as you can see, we get an error saying undefined is not a function. And this is because, as I said, arguments is not really an array type object. Okay? So it doesn't have a reduce function. So when the JavaScript interpreter tries to get the value of the property called reduce from arguments object, it receives undefined, and then it tries to make a call to this undefined. Hence we see this error that undefined is not a function. Alright. So to be able to make use of the reduce function, we need to convert the arguments object into an array. So let's rewrite the sum function. Let's define a variable which will store the array, and we can make use of the slice function from the array prototype like this. This syntax may look little funny right now, but don't worry about it too much. You will learn about the prototype object in the next chapter. Now, args is a real array of the arguments that was passed to this function. So now we can call the reduce function on args and return args.reduce and pass it the callback function. All right. Let's call the sum function now with a few arguments and make sure this works. What happens if we don't pass any argument? Well, we get an error. And I want you to pause here and try to think about why this error might be occurring. And you may want to watch the lecture on reduce function and how does it behave if we don't pass any argument for the initial value. Alright, so if we don't pass any argument, the array on which the reduce function is called is empty. In case you call reduce on an empty array, you must pass an initial value also. Otherwise, both previous as well as current arguments will be undefined in the first call itself to the callback function. Alright? So let's fix our sum function passing an initial value of 0 to the reduce function. So by now you should be able to handle functional programming quite well, at least as a beginner. Just remember that think about your programs in terms of data transformation, especially when you are dealing with list comprehension. Also, when you see a need of using a for loop to do some calculations on an array of data, think about using list comprehension functions. Now in the next chapter, we will learn how JavaScript supports object-oriented programming.